We're a bit over time, but I have good news. This presentation will be quite a bit shorter than I expected. Um, First, I want, as I promised in the abstract, I would talk about the fancy cryptography that's actually deployed. But I mean, realistically, uh, if you want to explain a scheme in any depth, it wouldn't fit. So I wanted to stick to some high-level remarks. Um, Rolf also gave a wonderful presentation, and he basically made half of my remarks, but I think I can still add a few. And also Tom basically gave an introduction to what my day-to-day work is mostly about. So we can go a bit quicker. But first, I want to thank you because although this presentation will be about a lot about what we don't have yet, we're actually pretty far with the migration. There's huge deployment of post-quantum key agreement now, and I think that's quite an achievement, and it wouldn't have been possible if you all didn't work on this for maybe more than a decade ago. So that's great. So we have Signal rolled out, Apple rolled out an iMessage. A lot of web servers have support for it, and browsers. I think now it's Chrome and Edge, but I think within a year, all major web browsers will have support for post-quantum key agreement. Wolf already introduced the concept of boring cryptography. So I think in 2010, I don't know of any deployment of fancy cryptography in 2010. Does any one of you know? In 2010, it's all just the signatures, hashes, symmetric encryption, Diffie-Hellman. And now it's actually quite different because, of course, I have to say, boring is a compliment here. And honestly, most of the boring cryptography is not boring enough. Even a simple thing like encrypting a file, I don't know how often I have to explain to people at work that you can't choose a random IV and then encrypt arbitrary lengths. It's really difficult. So even our boring cryptography is not boring enough yet, even without the nice subtleties and research that Rolf talked about. And boring also hard enough with migrating to post-quantum cryptography. So we got pretty far already with the key agreement, and that took quite a while. It took a few years to slowly rolling it out, finding buggy server software, finding buggy middle boxes, but we're on a good path there with the key agreement. As Tom explained very well in his talk, the signatures are very painful, and I expect they will be delayed. And what that will cause is that when the quantum computer is here, probably a big portion will not have upgraded in time. So that's not great. And also, as Thomas said, there's quite a lot of new options on the table to redesign things. Okay, but at least once the quantum computer is here, once we know it's here in a year, people will move to it. And even though they are not greater, larger, it's less performant, we will move to it. We will take the hit in industry where we can. With fancy cryptography, it's much more difficult because there's typically no alternative to move to. Yeah. So it's only actually in the past few years that in the mainstream industry, we've seen the adoption of fancy cryptography. I heard the term by Sophie, and also fancy is a compliment. I mean, you could also see that as a pejorative. And this is a very incomplete list of the fancy cryptography that we're using now. So if the anonymous credentials, zero knowledge proofs in Signal's private group system, and actually there's more parts to it, as in Ross' presentation you saw. WhatsApp uses a few fancy things. Apple Private Relay uses anonymous tokens to show you're a subscriber so that you can track. Actually, I don't know who has seen the presentation yesterday of Apple Intelligence, where they have when the question is hard enough, they send it to a LLM in the cloud, and to prevent tracking or linking this, they also use blind signatures as anonymous credentials. There's privacy pass, private attestation tokens. In the Netherlands, when during COVID, we used we had an app to show you're either vaccinated or tested, and for that we used anonymous credentials based on IDMX. There's also a identity wallet, Yiffy, which they are trying to propose for the European identity wallet. So at Cloudflare we use a few things. We have GeoKDL to distribute keys in specific places, attribute-based encryption. And there's also PAR, as Sophie said, Brave's looking into. So Chrome already uses it for detecting weak passwords. I'm surprised. So a few days ago, I looked around to see if it's collected anywhere, and it's not. So I started crowdsourcing a list of big deployments of fancy cryptography. So you can click that, but don't click it yet. It's quite incomplete yet. So I'm trying to fill a list at least to give them see what's actually out there now.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Go ahead.
So I think all these primitives, most of them have been known for a decade, I think. Why do you think?
So they have been, sorry, what do you say?
So I think like most of these, primitives itself has been known for a decade. So what do you think people been starting to really implement this in real life? What do you think was the key driver for this?
Yeah, I will get to that. Yeah, that's exactly what I want to get to. So implemented is one thing, standardized is another. So if you just have to use it yourself, like a messenger, just if you have a mess where you control most of it, you don't need to interoperate with others. You don't need standards that much, but if you want to work between parties who might have their own requirements for implementations, then you really need to have standards. And if you look at fancy cryptography that's been standardized, then it's basically only a few things, and it's also I would say compared to the things we've discussed today, this is very simple. There are three RFCs I know of. RZ blind signatures, opaque, and OPREF, and then there are a few in the progress. So opaque, I think, is almost done now. Privacy plus being standardized. Also, there's no standardized curve for pairings. Actually, for the longest time, when someone would propose, can we standardize this at the IETF? And then the question would be, does it use pairings? If the question is yes, then it's a no-go. We're not even trying to. But luckily that's changing. Yes. So what my worry is, and please forgive me the following placeholder image. I didn't have time I forgot to take my iPad, and my graphics aren't great. So my worry is that this is not the number of fancy cryptography that exists. It's the fancy cryptography that's deployed in the mainstream. And I'm really worried that as post-quantum cryptography is picking up and people get aware of this, that the number of deployed fancy cryptography will go down, especially once we're closer to once we expect quantum computers to arrive. I think it will. I'm a positive guy. I think it will go up again, but this is not great. And so before we think about, I think about the problem of making fancy cryptography post-quantum, I think it's good to reflect actually on the question which was asked to me, which is, why aren't we using fancy cryptography more often? It's a bit awkward that now I want to get your answers, but what would you say? Why isn't it used more often? Yeah, that's one part of it. Yes. Yeah. Why aren't there standards? Yes, but we'll get to that. I thought I was hoping that people would say it's a performance.
Maybe it's hard to monetize.
Sorry?
Maybe it's hard to monetize.
No, I don't think so. we will also get to that. Well, so performance in a lot of use cases is a problem, definitely. So there's especially, so this is starker. This is much more amplified now than it should be, because now we're looking at the things we have now, and then moving to post-quantum, the performance will be worse, and it's like, we can't do it, right? So now this performance issue is amplified, but I don't think it's actually the biggest. I think a bigger problem is complexity in implementation. Just to implement this, to standardize it, to specify it, to understand what it actually does. I mean, simple symmetric cryptography is actually already hard enough to understand what it does exactly. And also, the trade-offs are much more complicated. What you actually can do with it, it's not clear at all, because there are lots of knobs to turn, which makes it very difficult. Also, there are very few companies with any crypto people who can understand this on staff, right? Because you build a system, the system is done. Why do you need a person with expertise around, right? So you need a steady stream of things to do to have expertise on board, which also doesn't help. And also, I know you know that having just a paper with a specification is not enough to actually know whether it could solve your problem, right? If you have a scheme, you have just you might know the sizes, you don't know yet the CPU performance. So then at least you can answer, could it possibly be useful to my problem, right? And the next step is actually implementing it, seeing how well it actually performs with an academic implementation, right? And then you can start to answer, should it possibly be useful to my problem? And only when you have really a fast production-ready implementation, which also includes timing side channel resistance, constant time, then you really can answer, can it actually solve my problem? And this can make huge differences, right? Unless you really try to get a scheme constant time or really see paralyze it, only then you really know what's the actual performance and whether it will work. And in academia, it stops there often, right? But to actually use it in a situation where you have multiple parties, you also need standardization. And then once it's standardized, you also need implementations on many platforms and languages, right? So it's great that someone has an implementation in Go, but if the other guy uses Rust, it's really hard to put together. So RSA blind signatures, they are very mature in this sense. I think something like Groff 16 actually would be, I think there are today use cases for it, but but because it's zero knowledge proofs, that usually you want to have one party prove something to another party, right? And I think it will take, to standardize Groff 16, it will take quite a long time, I think. Talking about standardization, so are they blind signatures? I mean, these are simple things, right? Blind signatures. How complicated is a blind signature? And if you look at the timeline, so the first draft of my old colleague Chris in 2021 was the first draft, and it took until October in 2023 before this was standardized. This one is actually fast. This is very fast. Ristretto, which is a prime order group based on curve 25519, which is a prerequisite to a lot of the other cryptographic schemes. And they started work on this in 2019, and it took four years before this was done. I mean, there are other things with these standards. It's not always as efficient. People lose interest. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, but in practice, we see that standards are quite slow. Also, you might notice that there's this warning which says that this is not a real IETF standard. And that's because these are all done at the CFRG, which is part of the IRTF, which is not technically the IETF, but I won't bore you with all these details. But this is like the quicker standards to get, in a way. And then of the third one, which has an RFC aspect too, that one started in 2014. Yeah. And this is also not very complicated. But as you can see, there was a lot of time that it's lost interest. But still, I don't think this is actually, there are two other reasons I think that have a bigger influence on why fancy cryptography is not used. And the thing is that boring cryptography is very hard to avoid, right? I mean, you could move hard disks with armed couriers or something like that. But if you want to send data over an untrusted channel, I mean, symmetric cryptography, you can't avoid it, right? There's nothing else that solves this problem as clearly and efficiently as symmetric cryptography. Whereas, although we know that fancy cryptography really does things you can't do in any other way, right? It's hard to communicate, and fancy cryptography competes with other solutions using trusted third parties, trusted execution environments, policy constraints, and actually a lot of times also just not solving the problem. So that was quite a negative note, but I want to say that on a positive note, I think people don't really know what fancy cryptography can do. It has a discoverability problem. I'm sure that there are many more cases where we can use fancy cryptography now in industry if people would just know about it. If people know, oh, we have an anonymous token, this is a thing we can use. I think it would be used much more often than it is now. So how to solve this? That's of course hard. So how do we communicate today? I mean, this is a bit. It's not really true, but industry basically only tells what use cases they care about by saying, oh, we deployed some fancy cryptography, but what's left on the table is the things that they didn't know how to solve, right? And also a bit, it's not completely true, but academia just says, oh, this was possible because we designed this particular primitive. But these primitives are rarely tailored to the use cases. Of course, there's, I mean, the way we also communities, we've conferences, there's great workshops, we talk to each other as well. But I mean, mainly this is how it happens. So about cryptographic primitives, and Ralph also touched upon this already. I have mixed feelings. So on the one hand, they're great, right? Because also in Ralph's talk, it's about you need the KEM, you need the subtle security properties. It helps to think about them. It allows you modular analysis. It's also a clear target for publications, right? You want to know what's the best post-quantum signatures. What's the best post-quantum KEM? Although even with regular signature schemes, it's kind of breaking down already, right? Having a post-quantum signature is nice if it's usable in many situations, whereas we see that even in TLS, it's like maybe we can match one with, we use here one with a big public key, and here one with a small signature. So it's already starting to break down in the boring case, and it's even worse in the fancy cases. The nice thing is, though, that you deduplicate work, right? If everyone starts tailoring their primitives, then that's a lot of extra work, chances to make mistakes. And also, cryptographic primitives are easy to communicate. And the downsides, right, are that use cases typically don't map cleanly to primitives. For instance, one of the biggest use cases of blind signatures now is these anonymous tokens. And what's the message here? The message is a nonce, which is used to prevent double spend. So if a token is sent and to a party, which what they do is they take the nonce, they check whether it's been used again, check whether it's been used before to prevent the double spend. So the message, it doesn't have to be something specific. It has to be random and must be but it must not be under the control of the issuer, and the client doesn't care as long as it's a new random message. And if you just optimize for blind signatures, you leave the possibility of that optimization on the table. Also, yeah. And sometimes also cryptographic primitives become a thing of their own, right? Where they start you have this reification, where it starts distracting. So for instance, instead of when you think about how do you make a hybrid, people start thinking, how do you make a hybrid key agreement, they start thinking, how do I combine two arbitrary KEMs, right? And then if you have a generic method, you have to think about all the possible KEMs that could possibly exist with just certain properties, right? And you start creating problems for yourself, perhaps. But yeah, yeah. So, what are some takeaways? I think complexity often is a bigger bottleneck than performance on the deployment of fancy cryptography, even though the existing fancy cryptography, probably all of them can't be upgraded now because of performance. I think in general, it's complexity, which is the bigger bottleneck. I also think that industry honestly needs to get better at standardizing fancy cryptography, but that's not your problem. That's more of my problem. And I think it would be better to, I mean, you shouldn't stop thinking about cryptographic primitives, but it would be nice to start to think about specific use case. And it's actually exciting because you can come up with quite unique and new solutions, right? By thinking what's possible. Don't think, yeah. So, well, that's a few things I wanted to say, and I hope you're not too hungry yet. I'd like to hear your thoughts here, and also.
We have some comments on Zoom, so maybe I can read those first. Sorry, there's several, so let me just go to the first one. Okay, Sophia. No, wait, sorry, Tanya. So this is more of a comment. ISO had pairing-friendly curves for a while. I think this was regarding the comment that you made like at a very earlier part of the slide.
They already standardized where?
So ISO.
Oh, ISO, yeah, I did not know. Well, today I learned.
And for Sophia, from Sophia, Chrome has deployed both PSI and PIR, but PSI is not PIR. The password checking system of Chrome is PSI and PIR for device enrollment.
I stand corrected a second time for my sloppy language.
And from Jonathan, I think WhatsApp is using opaque for some key backup. So that's some not totally insignificant deployment.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned opaque. Yeah. So here. Yeah, oblivious opaque. Yeah.
Okay, so any other question from the room? Okay.
Yeah, so.
I think crypto could be more fancier if we see more a bug bounty.
Sorry, come again?
Bug bounty. So
bug bounty.
Yeah. So I think that's the most fancy part of crypto.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Saying so bug bounty when some bugs are found, and that's a huge rewards given to the person who finds that. So in any protocol or any system, when bugs are found.
So, yeah, bug bounties are great, but oh, you mean a bug bounty for solving these problems?
Yes.
Hi, thanks for the points you raised. There's one more important aspect, I think, if we take a look at what happens at standardization and so on, and what happens when you talk about post-quantum extensions of classical protocols. There's so many limits. We've seen like what Tom said about fragmentation, there's the MTU, there's timeouts, there's so many things that are relevant in practice. And if you're being honest, most of the extensions right now are workarounds for limits that were introduced like 20 or sometimes even 30 years ago. And we still stick with them. It's hard to get over them. And we have to, go for solutions that have that can somehow work with this. And we won't really get rid of this. And if we're talking to practitioners to implement this, then suddenly boring cryptography, like introducing a somewhat similar post-quantum scheme that is somewhat okayish, can still be fancy. And if you go to those implementers and say, now we want to have actual fancy cryptography, they are shocked. And I can understand why some people are like, oh my God, there's so many things that we have to take care of first. And so we have to, I guess, talk to people, like tell them what the benefits are. We need to get a lot more understanding about the complexity, like how can we handle more complexity so that it is still practical. And there must be some form of sweet spot, and we got to find it. I mean, we've seen a lot of advancement, a lot of great things that happened, more post-quantum crypto in the field. Still, we are far from fully post-quantum hybrid solutions that are used by everyone, like by at least 80% of all the protocols or the implementations.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts.
Okay, I see your hands up. I guess while I'm walking over there, I think for the list, I think IBEs were kind of implemented at some point, and also broadcasting.
GKDL uses also
I know, but I
IBE.
think like way before that, IBEs.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. And-
there's a link. It would be, I would love to.
Okay.
have
And
the
also
list.
broadcast encryption was used for DVDs, right? Early 2000 for DVDs. Yeah, like so broadcast encryption
Where was it used?
for DVDs, like you know.
What's DB?
What is DVD? Okay, like there's
DVD. Sorry, I DVDs. I did not know.
Hi. First, quick comment. Spike 2 is also in ARM's crypto PSA API, so sort of second standard, I guess, and shows that it's gaining traction in IoT. But generally speaking, crypto developers are not necessarily the people who know about use cases. And that is a strong argument to keep crypto as an interface. And that's something where we, as a hardware developer, for example, also see fancy crypto failing, that the use cases and use case requirements are not clear enough that for us, it's worth starting to implement a crypto accelerator. FHA, a prominent example. No one dares to really specify these parameters. They are going to be useful for a number of use cases. There it makes sense to implement a hardware accelerator. I know there are a few examples in published literature. I'm not sure whether they're deployed anywhere, but someone to really go to a crypto hardware developer and ask for it, I've not seen it happening. I've heard a lot of questions about it, but there is this gap between crypto users and crypto developers.
Certainly. Also, I would hope that we won't need hardware accelerators to get any reasonable performance for, in most cases, right? For the things we use.
any other comments or questions? I guess comments, yeah.
So what do you think about FHE? Like there's been a bunch of companies trying to push that in the past few years. So do you think it's going to pick up?
It's hard. It's hard to follow all the developments. We had a look at it, I think, almost a year ago. But for the use cases we had in mind, it was still way too. The ciphertexts were way too large, and the performance was way too slow. But there seems to be a lot of improvement. So I hope they keep going. But at the moment, it seems far from practical yet.
Okay. Any other question or comment or list to item to add to the list? Okay, well then, if not, thank you, Bas, for this talk.